Hello, friends. Thank you for tuning in to the Speaking of Equity podcast, where we believe all conversations about education are also conversations about equity. I'm your host, Cornelius Godfrey, and I am joined by a great friend of the podcast. I'm making a big assumption by saying that, but it's our friend Mayor Ethan Baker, the mayor of Troy. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
Cornelius, I'm so happy to be here, and I'm excited to be having this conversation with you today. It's great.
Yeah, and it's great to share with the community the level of access you're willing to grant lowly folks like me, and by way of me, being able to record and share this conversation with, pretty much anyone that will listen. And like I've said in the past, when we've had conversations with other leaders, I think this is a great way for us to demonstrate a sense of discourse, but also to show the thinking behind those who are really leading, and to share their thoughts in relation to equity. So again, 100% appreciate it.
Oh my gosh. Well, truth be told, you helped me out last week. You were on a virtual panel we did for the city of Troy for Black History Month, and you were fantastic. I've gotten some great feedback about you. And we didn't really know each other prior to that. And I'm excited to, again, like I said, to have this conversation with you, knowing what I know about you from what I heard last week, and to talk today. And you're absolutely right. Everything I've learned so far about some of these issues is that having the conversation is the most important part, and it is going to be clunky sometimes, and it's going to be awkward for probably more so for me than you at times, because you're running the ship. But I think that's what we can do to demonstrate to people that, hey, we recognize there's going to be some discomfort sometimes, and we recognize that it's not always an easy conversation to have, and we're going to make mistakes and we're going to stumble through, but that shouldn't stop us from doing it, because that's what can make real change and get things to where they need to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really draws an underline around the relational aspect, because at the end of the day, we might be talking about systems and structures, but in reality, we're talking about people. And, because of our relational nature, our best learning, our best growth happens in the context of relationship. So, how great is it that we're, able to have this conversation? And I don't want to, forget to acknowledge Dr. Brooks, Mayor Pro Tem Brooks, and also Dr. Meadows from the Kresge Foundation, really appreciating, their input, along with you and myself. It was a really great conversation. And I think it, opens the doors a bit so that people can see, there's learning for all of us to do, no matter where you're starting, no matter how you've come along to these thoughts about equity and justice and inclusion. All of us are starting from somewhere, and there's no shame in where you start. The responsibility, the impetus is really to move forward from where you are.
Oh, I love that, Cornelius. There's no shame. My wife's a therapist, so we talk a lot about shame in our house. But there's no shame in where you start. I think that's huge, and I think people are. Sometimes they're afraid to get going in these conversations because they think, oh, I should have done it already. I am starting too late, or what's somebody to think? But if we can get past the shame and just move forward, hey, that's going to serve us all really well.
It's a terrible motivator, right? Shame is the worst. Shame and guilt are the worst. And because you mentioned it, I've been really fascinated with the work of Brene Brown, and I'm sure that's a name that is probably mentioned in your household pretty often. Yeah. Having a wife who's a therapist, but just thinking about some of the things that she shared about how shame prevents innovation. And this creative level of ingenuity that is necessary to break down systems of oppression, right? Yeah. So that associated shame that people experience really deprives us and society of that change that we're hoping to make. So, what a wonderful way for us to move into this conversation, knowing that, you as, the mayor of Troy, have admitted that there are things that you are still learning and progressing in, and that there's no need to be ashamed about that even you in the grand seat of power
Now you're going too far for me on that one. I'll go with you up to the shame, but the grand seat of power might be a bit much. But listen, I'm going to tell you that just because I said, I don't want to be stuck in the shame, it doesn't mean I'm not going to feel it. It's still a struggle, right? I mean, that's part of it. I don't want anyone to think that, well, I don't want them to stop because the shame comes back or something.
Right, absolutely.
It's going to be there. We're all human. We all have that, right?
Absolutely. We'll all visit that place. The idea is not to live there.
Yeah. Kind of like Las Vegas.
Shout out to all our people who live in Las Vegas.
Well, you wonder about those folks.
So in thinking about, all that we can gain from a conversation like this, I really wanted to possibly start in, just you helping us to understand what your role is. And I think, it would be unfortunate for us to assume that everyone knows, what a mayor does and the role a mayor fills in the community, because I think there are probably a lot of misconceptions, right, about what your job looks like. And then, where do those misconceptions lie? Where does the reality lie? And then where are those opportunities to advance equity within that reality?
Sure. Well, it's funny. I'm going to call you out a little bit. Last week, you made some assumptions about my job as mayor. I don't know if you remember thinking.
I do.
Yeah, right. But the reality is, so City of Troy, it's pretty straightforward. We have a council manager form of government, which means that we have the mayor and city council members who do the policy setting and the policy setting body for the city. We obviously approve the budget and we're the direct representatives to the people of the city of Troy. But we also hire a city manager who runs the day-to-day operations of the city. So unlike other cities, I, as the mayor, don't run the day-to-day operations of the city of Troy. So I'm considered a part-time mayor, even though sometimes it feels very full-time, especially over this past year. But the good news about that is, along with what we're talking about today, I mean, we are the policy setting body. So it's up to us, the mayor and my other 6 council members, to, if we want to move the city in a direction from a government standpoint, like towards equity and inclusion, that's up to us to give that direction to the city management. And then it's their job to execute it and make it happen. And, certainly we do things from a leadership perspective that come to us on our own. We do things that come to us from residents or businesses out in the community. I mean, we're obviously the main interface with our residents and with our businesses. And, some of the DEI stuff we're starting to work on in the city has come from us internally, and some of it has come from members out in the community. So that's in a nutshell, our form of government. Obviously, as the mayor, I certainly, sounds kind of silly sometimes, but I take on the ceremonial role for the city. I represent the city, whether it's a celebration of some sort or whether it would be something more tragic, God forbid. But I am the face of the city in that respect. And I get to do cool things like this and talk on behalf of the city. And I enjoy that very much. And, I'm also a lawyer outside of my role as the mayor. So I keep very busy. But, I love being the mayor of the city of Troy. I got elected in November of 2019 after being on city council for 4 years. I had about 3.5 months of fairly normal mayor life in the city of Troy, and then COVID-19 kind of took over. So it's been very, very eye-opening, and I promise you, I never campaigned on a platform of how to deal with a global pandemic. So as most of us didn't. So it's been wonderful, but I love the opportunity I have to speak out for what I think needs to be spoken out for in the city, and to celebrate the city, cheerlead the city when necessary, and also help guide the city with any policy changes with the work of my fellow council members.
Yeah, and thank you so much for educating me and helping me to learn about the details about your role, and then just in general, hearing you speak about the ability you have to connect with others, right? Be they people who are already in work within the municipality, but also connecting with community members. Those, I would imagine, are really great opportunities for you to grow and understand, what the specific needs are. Because I think those are very, very rooted in who we are as individuals and communities and families, and then communities within the community. So, your ability to connect with others really rounds out your perspective, I would imagine, when you're determining what are the next most important things to achieve and accomplish, and then how and who might be the good people to tap to be able to find resources to make those advancements. And I wonder, as we think about the specifics of our community and the identities that are held across the myriad of languages and cultural identities and all the very diverse elements that are inside of Troy. I wonder how you have internalized your own identity markers and how those have either helped or even inhibited your understanding of the needs of this very, multifaceted community.
Cornelius, it's about to get real. I see we're done with the pleasantries, huh? No, I listen. I look at me. I'm a white male. I'm educated. I'm in a position of power in the city of Troy. So it'd be foolish for me not to admit that I have some kind of privilege based on who I am. No one feels sorry for white males in this country, and they're not. They obviously have the advantages that others don't, and obviously not everybody will admit that. I have no problem admitting that. I think where the conversation gets a little dicier is what do you do about that, right? And I think I think there's different groups of people, and some people have very specific ideas, and some people are kind of more in the middle, like, well, is it my fault that I'm white? I don't feel like it's my fault, but I've certainly had advantages because of it, and and then there's people who are like, what? I'm white, that's someone else's problem, right? I think you kind of see that whole shift in paradigm. So, I'm a white male, married, been with my wife for 23 years. I have 3 kids. I live in a suburban house and neighborhood and, with a dog and education. It's like that in many ways is what the American ideal and dream has always been. So I really shouldn't complain about anything, right? Even though you can always find something to complain about. And, there's different things. I think the difficulty where some people get tied up and don't feel comfortable talking about white privilege, and I hear it a lot, is somebody will say, well, okay, yeah, I'm white, but, I was poor as a kid. And so I had struggles too. And which is me, I grew up very poor. I'm a single mom, alcoholism. It was not a great childhood. And, I think that the problem is when you start trying to compare, well, those struggles to struggles of race. And, I think that's where people get really tied up. And I think that's where if we could do a little work on those issues to try to smooth out those rough edges so people could see things a little differently, we'd be better off. So, my identity markers definitely, I recognize that they've helped me in this country. They've certainly, they're helping my kids. I can't deny that. But I'm trying to be very aware of that and at least teach my kids and my wife, she's a marriage and family therapist, and she's just finished up her PhD, or she's in her dissertation phase. And she, big social justice is a big part of her education. And, you learn a lot that you wouldn't normally hear. And I think that's why education is so important, because it opens your eyes to things that you've never even thought about. And I really have appreciated some of the conversations we've been able to have, Bethany and I, because of the things that have come out of her coursework. And, maybe that makes me a little more open to some of these conversations where some of my other, white male Republicans, I'll even say, may not be comfortable doing. But, I think I'm better for it. And I think that overall we'll be better for it as a result. If more of us can get online with that kind of, at least understanding the issues, hearing the language, it amazes me what I didn't know and what I still don't know, frankly. But the stuff that I've learned over the past few years that I didn't even know existed makes me wonder how much out there is I still don't even know that I can't even touch, right?
Yeah. And how great is it that, you don't have to go very far for your learning, right? Your wife, who I'm sure is always willing to teach you as many lessons as you're willing to see. But then also those connections with the community, like being able to connect with, people within your office. And then also, people who are, neighbors and friends and family members and, people who are, communicating with you based on an issue they're concerned about. And then being able to pick up, this is a perspective that would have eluded me completely unless I'd had that connection, unless I was able to communicate with them in this way.
Totally. Or even just concepts. I mean, it sounds, I break it down even more. It's just taking a second to think like, oh, maybe they're not reaching out to us at City Hall because they don't feel comfortable with it, right? And you think like, well, we've constantly said, and as you know, I mean, you're in our school district. Troy's diversity, we're not a black city. Our diversity doesn't come from the black population like other cities does. We've got a high Indian population and Asian population, right? And so I think it's a different type of diversity too. And sometimes that changes how we look at things a little bit. But I've learned a lot about, we're always like, well, why aren't we hearing more from our Indian residents and our Chinese and our Korean residents? What's missing? And, I'm learning that part of it's cultural. Sometimes they don't feel like they have going to a government official is not necessarily something they would ever consider where they've come from before here, or they just don't feel like we care enough to engage them. And that's where the big disconnect there is. And I've really struggled with that. Is like, how can we say, hey, we're here to represent you too, and we want you to be part of this process. You're a major part of our city. Look at our school district. Look at our schools. They are beautifully diverse, right? I mean, they really, really are. And yet you look at our city council, and Teresa Brooks is our first person of color we've ever had on council. You look at our city administration, everyone looks a lot more like me than you, for example, right? I mean, and I think, okay, we need to do a better job of making sure we're creating a space where it's okay to engage and recognize that just like I may make some mistakes with my language or things I said, probably I've just stepped on a bunch of landmines right here. But, we have to expect that other people in our community are going to struggle too, because they don't know the way our system and government necessarily works. So, so we have to give them some grace, just like I hope they give me some grace, I guess is my point.
Oh man, you said a mouthful, and
I often do, Cornelius. So watch out.
but this idea of grace, right? Being able to, approach conversations that would be considered, like you said, a minefield, with this sense that, I'm bringing a good faith effort to this table, and so's the person I'm talking to. So even if we happen to step in it more than once, we recognize that both of us are really essentially after the same thing, and that's the good of the people who we serve. And I think as we move forward, we see ourselves moving along this continuum because, wherever you'd place us now, I think in the past, we've really been able to, and when I say we, I mean as a community, but maybe even as a nation, we've used the word diversity or the concept of diversity as a signal that those who are present feel welcome and a sense of belonging. And that's not always the case. It can be very much the case that you can have a community that's majority, English as a first language or English as a second language, first generation citizens, all of the above, but still have values and norms and affirmations that encourage and reward assimilation to this American ideal versus being able to walk in your authentic identity as a person from whatever background or community you come from. And I think those are very distinct things, because while being diverse is a wonderful element for any community to experience, you only get the full benefit when those people who are from marginalized communities, first generation Americans, all the gamut, when they feel a sense of belonging and ability to bring their whole self to conversations, to problem solving opportunities, when they're able to be all of themselves and share all the wealth of their background and celebrations, but also the different perspectives and thinkings. And for me, that's where we start to get into conversations about equity. That's when we start to get into conversations about inclusion. And my heart's belief is that the burden of inclusion can never be placed on the excluded. In other words, if people have been excluded to the extent that their perspectives have not been historically valued, I think it's a mistake for us on the inside to expect that they'll make, the vast journey to get to us. Rather, I think the responsibility is on us to go to where they are. And that's a challenge, right? There are oceans of misunderstanding to cross for us to get to where people are. But again, how great is it that you and I are able to have this conversation, that you and Mayor Pro Tem Brooks are able to have your conversations. Tell me about how you're able to fill some of those gaps through either relationships or learnings or resources. I know there are probably people within your inner circle who, kind of stand as your guru.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You mentioned Mayor Pro Tem Brooks, and I think as like I said, she's the first person of color to ever be on our city council, which is fascinating to me. And I have leaned on her a lot over this past year, probably too much. I've talked about this a little bit. Like I feel like she shares a big burden, or has a big burden because she's the first and only person of color on our council. We all look to her to be the guru, like you said, on that stuff. And I feel bad for her that she's forced to kind of take on that role. But to her credit, we've had a lot of wonderful conversations about race and about what that means and what it's meant for her and what it means for me and what we can do together to help our community work through some of these issues. Obviously, I've mentioned my wife here. I look to my wife for almost everything, and I have no shame in saying that. I mean, she's absolutely half of me, and we're a team. And she's been able to teach me so much over the years on certain things, and I'm assuming I teach her some things as well. But I mean, I greatly depend on her for her counsel and for her grace and her love to work through some issues sometimes. And because of her education and her background and her field, she obviously has a different outlook and perspective that I wouldn't normally have. And it's a wonderful resource for me to be able to have her here at home, right? I mean, you can't buy that. But there's people in my life that have influenced me heavily on issues like this and other issues. And I can't, it's hard to put it into one big person. And I know some people say, oh, you know what, Toni Morrison's it for me, or like, that's the person, or Maya Angelou, right? I mean, she speaks to so many people. Like I could tell you, probably 100 different political figures that I've taken something from over the years, historical or more, modern day. But I mean, if I really had to put it into one guru, it's Bethany. And then, on the council level, I think Teresa's helped so much. And really, I mean, we could spend a couple hours talking about people who have helped and influenced, but we won't do that.
Well, Mayor, I think you've earned a lot of points both at home and at the office. So congratulations on that. But yeah, and I can say the same, that, in the professional world and at home, I can count on a healthy sense of challenge from the perspective that are presented from, my wife as well, who thinks very differently than I do, but, has to be listened to. And being able to have conversations with people who feel a sense of safety and a sense of confidence in your ability to hear them despite some level of disagreement, I think that's an invaluable asset for lowly people like me, but especially for people like you. So Mayor, I really want to be able to facilitate any kind of support for your work, because I think it's very valuable, and I appreciate being able to have a conversation that helps to expose your thinking in the world of equity, and I think it's a great thing for the community to experience. How can those who are hoping to support your efforts, who are looking to be allies in ways that are increasing equity and inclusion in Troy, how can they support you and connect with you?
like contact information, Cornelius? I mean, listen, reach out to me anytime. I love hearing, tell me I'm wrong, tell me I'm right, tell me anything. I mean, I think getting feedback from the community is a huge part of it. You can always email me, mayorbaker@troymi.gov. I love getting emails. So mayorbaker@troymi.gov. I'm on social media too, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter.
Yeah, you are.
All of you. I try. Social media is hard. It doesn't come naturally to me, but I'm doing the best I can. But all those, it's Mayor Ethan Baker, but it's at Ethan Baker MI. I think all 3 of my accounts are now synced to that. So you can find me there. But listen, come to us. Big part of what I'm trying to get back to or in the city is, community engagement and community interaction and just hearing different voices, same voices. That's a big part of how we represent you. And if we don't hear from you, if we don't have these conversations with you, I think it's really difficult for us to properly represent you. Coming out of COVID, I say coming out of, I hope we're on our way out.
God's ears.
Right. I'd like to get back to some more of that traditional, meetup type stuff, coffee hours in person, even in the park, just talking to people. And campaigns tend to focus on door knocking and you go door to door and you learn so much when you do that. I wish I had the time to do that year round, term round, nonstop. I think it's a shame that we really only do that, in the last few months before we're asking you to vote for us. I think we'd all be better served if we could do a little more of it regularly. But please share with me your thoughts. Tell me that you love this aspect of what the city's doing as it relates to equity. Tell me what you don't like. Tell me why, though, if you can. I think constructive feedback is always better than just, you suck. Because I can internalize a lot of reasons why you might be thinking that, but unless you tell me the why, I don't actually know and I can't work with it. Because a big part of, I think growth and as humans is, we're going to make mistakes. I make mistakes. Cornelius, I'm sure you've made a few mistakes, but if we can learn from those mistakes and work with that, I mean, that's what it's all about. And so again, tell me where I'm wrong, tell me why I'm wrong, and let me try to fix it or work with it, or tell you why I think you might be wrong that I'm wrong. And I say that kindly. I mean, I'm very open to hearing the criticism, but maybe you need to come along a little bit and learn a few things at the same time. So I think that's part of it.
Yeah, and what a great way for us to punctuate this particular conversation, but also, make way for ongoing dialogue, is that, you're open to feedback. And hopefully as we, create these relationships within the community, we'll begin to hear some of those voices. And, I really appreciate you sharing yours with us today. Thanks again.
I'm so glad I could do this. I appreciate it very much. Thank you for what you're doing in our community as well.
Yep. Well, thanks for tuning in to Speaking of Equity. We look forward to speaking with you again. Until then, take care.